I was rinsing a handful of cherry tomatoes when I heard my husband Charles's phone ring. The water ran over my fingers, an ordinary moment on an ordinary Tuesday evening, until his voice stopped me cold. He fell. How bad is it? Charles asked, urgency sharpening his tone. I turned off the tap, tomatoes forgotten, and listened. His father, my father-in-law, had taken a bad fall at my sister-in-law's place. Blood, confusion, the blare of an ambulance siren through the speakerphone. After he hung up, the following moments became a blur of incoming calls. 2 of Charles's siblings, then a call from his mother that he put on speaker. "You need to get here now, Charles." His mother's voice cracked like a whip. "Your father's waiting in the ER alone." "I can't, Mom. Anna's just had her eye surgery, and I've got the kids to look after," he replied, stealing a glance in my direction, his eyes apologetic. Silence. "Then there's your daughter. Can't she deal with it?" "Those kids aren't even yours, Charles. Your dad should be your priority." Her words hit like a gut punch. Our 4-year marriage and the kids we'd been raising together, her grandkids, dismissed in a single breath. I watched as hurt flickered over Charles's face, then hardened into resolve. "No, Mom, my family needs me here. And those kids, they have been mine since the day I chose to love them." There was steel in his words, a finality that silenced any retort. We knew hospital policy. Due to the flu season, the ER was on lockdown. No visitors allowed, no exceptions. And with the cold snap outside, waiting in the parking lot wasn't an option. His siblings were silent, their expectations for him to abandon his immediate family clear, even if they would never say it outright. Only his mother had voiced that cruel sentiment. Charles reassured his siblings that he'd get updates and arranged to pick his dad up when he was released. As he ended the calls, Charles turned to me and our eyes locked. A silent agreement. We were in this together, today and every day that followed. And though we hoped for his father's swift recovery, we knew that some wounds in our family went deeper than the flesh. Our evening moved forward with a tense normality. Dinners were made, homework was checked, and our daughter was picked up from her dance class. But beneath it all ran a current of impending change. The house was quiet after the kids went to bed, a stark contrast to the uproar from earlier. Charles and I were left alone with our thoughts, the echoes of the call with his mother lingering in the air like the remnants of a bad storm. I could see it in his eyes, the turmoil. "Your adult daughter can handle those things," his mother had said. "Those aren't his real kids anyway." The words hung heavy between us, a spectral presence at our kitchen table. Sitting across from him, I braced myself for the conversation. "Charles," I began, my voice steady though my hands were not. "What she said about the kids," he ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration and fatigue. "She's always been tough, you know that. But this, she crossed a line tonight." "Your face when she said it," I murmured, recalling the pained expression that had flashed across his face. "I've never seen you look like that before." Charles's gaze met mine, a silent storm behind his eyes. "Anna, I don't care what she thinks. My dad's fall doesn't change the fact that our family comes first. Those kids, our kids, they matter more to me than her approval." "But family is supposed to be there for each other," I countered, the advocate for reconciliation, even as my own heart balked at the coldness we'd been served. "You're right, but family doesn't just mean blood," he responded firmly. "Family means the people you choose to stand by, no matter what, the ones you sacrifice for, love, and protect. She may not see you and the kids as her family, but I do. That's all that matters." In that moment, I saw my husband not just as the man I loved, but as the pillar he truly was. Faced with the unthinkable, the stark dismissal from his own mother of the family he cherished, he stood unwavering. Silence settled as we took comfort in the strength of our bond, one his mother's words couldn't shake. We had each other, and we had our children, our family, built not on blood but on love and choice. I watched as Charles checked his phone again for any updates. His father was still being observed, now resting after receiving stitches for the gash on his head. Despite the tumultuous evening, a faint smile graced my husband's lips when he read his father was doing well. The moment was poignant, a clear declaration. We were still a family. And nothing, not harsh words, not cold judgment, and not even the frigid isolation his mother tried to thrust upon us, could tear that apart. The night waned, exhausting the silence until there was nothing left to do but retire and await morning's light. I lay beside Charles, watching the rise and fall of his chest as slumber took him. Sleep eluded me, though. My mind was a carousel of worry for my father-in-law and unspoken fears about the fractures in our family. Morning crept in like an unwelcome guest, casting a pall over what was once the sanctuary of our kitchen. The silence was oppressive as Charles and I prepared for the day, our gestures mechanical, the routine a mere echo of normalcy. It wasn't until the kettle whistled that we received the call from the hospital, relieving some of the tension with an update. My father-in-law had made it through the night, the doctors opting to keep him for observation due to the head injury, but noting his condition was stable. No visitors allowed. The voice on the other end reiterated it was policy, especially with the surge in flu cases. I glanced at Charles, noticing the wariness that had settled around his eyes. The isolation mandated by the hospital felt like an added insult, leaving my father-in-law to recover surrounded by the sterile white walls, devoid of the warmth of family. As we sat at the kitchen table, Charles broke the silence. "I'm going to call Dad," he declared, reaching for his phone with newfound determination. The conversation that followed was a mixture of relief and warmth. My father-in-law's voice, gravelly but still laced with his characteristic humor, filled the kitchen. "Ah, Charlie, don't you worry about me. Hospital food ain't my idea of a good time, but it'll do until they spring me out of here." Charles chuckled, a sound so needed and genuine it lifted the corners of my own mouth. "We've been worried, Dad," he admitted. "How are you feeling, truly?" There was a pause on the line, a softening. "Like a young buck," my father-in-law joked, but then his tone grew serious. "I'll be okay, son. Just keep taking care of those kids and Anna. You're doing right by them, you know that, don't you? They've been in my heart since the day you introduced them to me." The endorsement from his father, a man who'd never been one to express emotion freely, was a balm to the raw edges of Charles's spirit, and, by proxy, to mine as well. Through the sterile distance, his words reached us not as the necessary oxygen, but as the rarefied air of affirmation and love. That phone call didn't heal all wounds, but it did reinforce the notion that we were not entirely alone, despite the frigid policies and colder judgments from others. And while my father-in-law lay in that hospital bed, a discordant symphony of beeping machines his only company, he, too, knew his family was with him, in spirit, if not in body. We filled the rest of our day with mundane activities, as if by immersing ourselves in the simplicity of chores and errands, we could wash away the complexities of our situation. We were a unit, united and strong, and we resolved to stand as one, no matter what. Days blurred together as we waited for news of my father-in-law's condition, hoping each phone call would bring us closer to having him home. In the quiet between updates, doubts crept into my mind like unwelcome shadows. Over a cup of coffee one morning, Charles caught me staring blankly at the wall, my thoughts visible in the furrow of my brow. "Hey," he said softly, reaching for my hand. "Talk to me." I exhaled deeply, realizing the weight of my thoughts had become too heavy to shoulder alone. "It's just everything that's happened. It's making me see things differently. With your family, I mean. Your mom's words, the silence from your siblings, it's like now we know where we stand, and it's not where I thought." Charles squeezed my hand, his own concern visible. "I know," he murmured. "Believe me, I know. It's like a veil's been lifted, and now we're seeing the true colors of people I've known my whole life." We spoke candidly, the hurt and disbelief flowing freely between us. I shared my disappointment, especially regarding my sister-in-law. Our friendship had blossomed long before I married Charles, but now it felt like another casualty of the divide. "I just can't wrap my head around it," I admitted. "Karen and I have been close since we were kids. To think she's said nothing, done nothing." Charles let out a weary sigh. "It hurts, I won't lie, but maybe it's not just about taking sides. They're dealing with Dad's injury in their own way. We've got to focus on us right now." But the simple declaration did little to assuage the ache. His mother's stinging rejection and the quiet complicity of his siblings had left a mark on our lives. We were at a crossroads. The path we once walked together with Charles's side of the family had forked, urging us to tread carefully into what felt like uncharted territory. I couldn't help but wonder if we would only drift further apart or if there was some way back to how things used to be. As we got up from the table, a silent agreement passed between us. Our relationship with Charles's family might never be the same, but perhaps, in time, we could redefine it. Maybe we could build something new, not reliant on approval, but standing firm on the foundation of our unit. Our family, the one we chose every single day. The holidays were upon us, a time when festivity was supposed to overshadow all else. This year, however, the joy was muted, the lights a little less bright, and the carols sounded more like melancholic echoes of happier times. What was traditionally a gathering of merged families became a stark reminder of the rifts created in what felt like another lifetime. Charles and I had chosen to host a small, intimate dinner rather than the usual large family gathering. It was a step back, a protective measure for the emotional well-being of our family. The house was decorated with care, a facade of normality, but the undercurrent of strain was palpable. On the day, when Charles's siblings arrived, there was a stiffness in their greetings, a formality that had never been part of our interactions before. We moved through the motions of the meal, exchanging pleasantries and the customary laughter, but it was like listening to a well-rehearsed play, every line predictable, no true emotion behind the words. Karen, my sister-in-law and once confidant, seemed especially distant. Occasional glances my way, which should have been comforting, only served as reminders of our now strained relationship. The bond we shared seemed reduced to nothing more than a shared history that we could no longer rely on. As Charles carved the turkey, his movements betrayed a slight tremor. It wasn't just from handling the knife, but from the weight of holding together a semblance of unity. Our children, keenly attuned to the shifted dynamics, were unusually subdued, their eyes often searching ours for reassurance. The conversations were forgettable, but one moment stood clear, when his mother offered a toast. "To family," she said, her eyes briefly meeting Charles's, "and to traditions that keep us together." The words should have warmed, but instead they burned. How could traditions bridge the gap when the foundation had crumbled? How could we speak of togetherness when her actions had so mercilessly shown us we were not truly part of the fold? Later, after the guests left and the lights dimmed, I found Charles standing by the window, looking out at the snow-blanketed world, a silent sentinel in his own home. As I approached, I understood that here stood a man torn between his love for his parents and siblings and his commitment to the family we'd created. The decorations gleamed dully in the background, a stark contrast to the warmth that typically filled our house during the holidays. The days that followed the holiday dinner were a quiet affair. The house returned to its usual routines, yet the air remained charged with the residue of unsaid things and unhealed wounds. My husband, usually the rock in turbulent seas, now wore a subtle cloak of sadness that no amount of cheer could lift. It was a few days post-holidays when Charles's phone rang, slicing through the silence of our evening. His mother's name flashed on the caller ID, and an involuntary tension gripped us both. He answered, her voice a faint murmur from the device. The conversation was brief, her tone softer, perhaps chastened by the season's spirit or the echo of her own words. "I've been thinking a lot," she had said. "I was out of line, Charles. I'm sorry." An apology, so sought after, now didn't carry the relief one would expect. I watched as Charles responded, his words measured. "Thanks, Mom, we just need some time, that's all." After he hung up, the space between us felt like a chasm that had suddenly shrunk. "She apologized," he said, almost to himself, as if testing the reality of what had occurred. We both knew it wasn't enough to erase the hurt, but it was a start. A door creaking open when we thought it might remain closed. It was clear that while his mother's words did not undo the damage that had been done, they laid the first stone on the pathway to rebuilding. Yet, the apology from his mother wasn't the only one we received. Karen, too, reached out, her message a mix of apology and explanation, a tentative offer to restore what had been broken down. It was my turn to sit with the words, weighing the possibility of a renewed friendship against the pain of betrayal. As the end of the year approached, we found ourselves in a reflective mood. Charles and I discussed long into the night what these gestures meant and how we should respond. The consensus was a cautious one, welcoming the chance to move forward, but with an understanding that our first commitment was to protect our family. The dynamics within the larger family had shifted, but we realized that it was within our power to shape how we let those changes affect us. Forgiveness was on the horizon, perhaps not immediate, but possible with time and genuine effort. Resolutions were made, not the New Year kind, but the kind that are etched into the framework of a family's principles. We resolved to let down our guard, but not our defenses, to approach with an open heart, but not with forgetfulness. And above all else, to ensure that the love within our walls was enough to sustain us through whatever lay beyond. Our story didn't end with the dropping of the ball or the stroke of midnight. It merely marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where the revelations of old wounds could guide the healing process. It promised a journey, not free from obstacles, but one we were ready to face as a family united.